Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and if here at American Freedom Radio, thank you so much. I'm sorry if I hope the listeners can hear me right now. I'm not able to. I wasn't able to hear the cue, so I'm assuming that we are live on air. But again, you can find the show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And if you are new to the show, there are, of course, lots of ways to listen. You can, of course, follow the show on my RSS feed, at my website. Of course, everything is archived here at AFR. You can also find me on YouTube, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, Player FM. There's a whole bunch more as well. And of course, I am also rebroadcast later on Friday nights on a host of other networks, including AwakeRadio.us, People's Internet Radio, PSN, and also Ed Opperman's Spreaker channel. So lots of ways to listen to the show. Quickly, I just want to remind the listeners out there about my computer problems, and perhaps that might even be contributing to why I couldn't hear the cue coming through my headphones just now. So I am in the process of getting the brand new computer. It should be I should be trying to pick it up later this weekend. But again, if you want to help support the show, please do make a donation to PayPal for some of the computer funds, so to speak. A lot of people have already done that. I also want to thank Travis and Thor, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, for recently signing up to Patreon. So again, if you want to support my work on Patreon, then you can always go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can become a subscriber for as little as $1 a month. And I believe we have our guest on the line, a good friend, a frequent guest on the show, Robbie Martin from MediaRoots.org, and also a very heavy agenda.com. Robbie, are you there?
Yeah, Pierce. Thanks for having me.
I can't hear Robbie if he's on the line right now.
Hey,
so I'm not sure. We might be having some technical difficulties getting Robbie on there. So we'll just wait. We'll bide our time and hopefully Robbie will be connected to the call. We are going to be speaking with Robbie Martin about a couple interesting topics today. A big one that we're going to be getting into hopefully very soon is the recent quarantining of a 9/11 subreddit that is I think it's the 9/11 Truth, which is a very popular subreddit. I think they've got definitely tens of thousands of subscribers, and they've recently been quarantined. So we're going to be talking about that and also some other stuff. I mean, there's a lot that has been going on in the news as of late. We've got the wonderful Nikki Haley recently resigned from the UN, although I guess she'll still technically be there until I think the end of the year, until they find a replacement. So very interesting as well. Well, maybe while we're waiting to get Robbie on the line, we can also talk a little bit about. I was going to save this for the second part of the show, but maybe we'll get into it now. But I put the call out there to send in listener questions, and I did get I got some really great ones. I also kind of went back through some of my old emails and found a lot of questions that I hadn't answered. So, I don't know if I want to get all into that right now, but certainly And as I'm just trying to... No, okay, we don't have Robbie yet, so. I do enjoy getting the questions, and I got a lot of them. And again, I hope that people out there will send more in the future, because it is a fun way to connect with the listeners. And then, I've got a whole bunch here. I was planning on doing this for the second hour, but if I can't connect with Robbie soon, we might have to get into it here in the first hour. But as I babble right now, trying to, it's really difficult. If you haven't noticed, it's difficult to type and speak at the same time, which is what I'm attempting to do right now to contact Danny. So bear with me for 1 second.
Hello?
And wow, I mean, this is just a real, this is almost, like a comedy of errors right now. But this is live radio. So maybe we'll talk about some other stuff in the news, and I'll wait to answer, my, listener questions, for maybe the second hour, unless we absolutely don't get Robbie. As I just take a sip of tea. I've also got a bit of a sore throat, so my apologies if my voice gets a little bit hoarse while we're talking. But interestingly, the Nikki Haley news is interesting. Now I remember reading, I mean, this was like months and months ago, that it was being floated around that Nikki Haley wanted to leave, or she was going to leave, and then that sort of disappeared. And apparently, and I don't know if this is totally accurate, or if this is sort of the story that they always trot out, is that she said this was always, like, the extent of her term was always going to be, I guess, whatever this was, 2 years or something like that, at the UN, and then she was going to resign, to leave. So no, maybe that is the case. It's odd that she leaves, because for all intents and purposes, she's one of the few people that seemingly seemed to really kind of support Donald Trump. Now, I don't know if they're really having some sort of a disagreement behind the scenes. I don't think so, because she seems to be very much in favor of most of the more psychotic things that Donald Trump wants to do on the world stage. She's been instrumental in going after Iran. She's as pro-Israel as they come. She's also, similar stuff about, Syria. She's dragged her heels on all sorts of political issues within the UN that America has traditionally always wanted to drag its heels on. So it's an odd decision for her to leave, especially in the midst of a seeming campaign against everybody. And I'm hearing that we're going to reconnect on Skype. So bear with me, listeners. We'll be right back. Okay. Well, we are we live now? That's always a good thing when you're doing live radio. Hopefully, we'll have the call connected. So I'm not sure if some of the listeners out there might have been hearing Robbie talking, perhaps over me talking. So this will make for an interesting episode. Hopefully, though, Robbie will be able to stick around a little bit in the second hour as well. So we'll have to see how that all goes. And I'm waiting Robbie's arrival right now. But as I was saying, let's just assume that the call is all good. As I was saying before, it's odd that Nikki Haley would leave while this campaign against Iran seems to be kind of ramping up. Her status. Is Robbie there? Okay, Robbie,
hey.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Pierce, how's it going?
Wonderful. So quick question. Were you talking while I was talking before?
Yeah, I think John Gold was listening. He said he could hear both of us, but we couldn't hear each other. I mean, I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me. So. Okay,
great. So thank you, John, for clearing that up. So I guess, just disregard the first couple of minutes there. Let's just assume that we've just started the show. I want to welcome back my good friend and frequent guest, Robbie Martin of MediaRoots.org and also averyheavyagenda.com. Robbie, how are you?
I'm doing good, Pierce. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. And as I was saying earlier, I don't know if people could hear, we wanted to kind of start by talking about this recent quarantining of several subreddits on Reddit, but in particular, we wanted to focus on the quarantining of the 9/11 Truth subreddit. And I've sort of had like a renewed interest in 9/11, in part after watching your great live stream on 9/11, talking about a whole range of topics and things. And I was at the live. I know you knew I was at the live stream. I was sending in lots of questions and comments. And that you actually inspired me to get a copy of Kevin Fenton's book, Disconnecting the Dots, and also I picked up a copy of Hopsicker's book on Muhammad Atta. And about, I think next week, I will be talking with John Duffy and Ray Nowachowski, I believe is how you pronounce it, from the Watchdogs Didn't Bark. And I've been, again, as I said, I've had this sort of renewed interest in 9/11, in part because it seems to be fading ever more rapidly. And of course, it's sort of as I become more and more interested and as I kind of dive deeper and deeper into it, the attention span for most people when it comes to 9/11 has sort of dropped off completely. And this quarantining on September 27th on Reddit was really interesting for a lot of reasons. Not just because of the quarantining 9/11, but I'll just say they also quarantined, among others, and I'll have a link up to a Reddit post about this. But the subreddit Watch People Die was quarantined. So was the Red Pill, Full Communism, White Nationalism, Against Gay Marriage, the Zog subreddit, the Zionist Occupation Government subreddit was also quarantined, and all of those there would be this little explainer saying it is dedicated to shocking or highly offensive content. If you are seeking to leave a hate group or for historical information on or for information on, and then there would be a link provided by Reddit. Now that's what they all said. For the 9/11 Truth subreddit, it said, quote, "It may contain a high degree of misinformation. If you are seeking historic information about the September 11th attacks, please visit the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, which is the official 9/11 commission." So again, all of the other subreddits, things like whites are beautiful, all sorts of Goyim Defense Force, all of these mostly like hate groups essentially. They're all basically just saying that there's highly shocking or offensive content. The 9/11 subgroup is saying that it's incorrect information. So much so that you should just read the government's report on all of this. And again, out of the 23 subreddits that were quarantined on that day, the 9/11 Truth one really kind of seems to be the odd man out. Not only with the language, but, and I'll throw this to you, Robbie, the implication is that the information presented in subreddits such as White Pride, and the Red Pill are accurate, or that in fact the information is correct, it's just offensive, whereas 9/11's is incorrect. So, I mean, what was your take on this, Robbie, on the actual language that was used?
The actual language that was used was definitely interesting, but I guess when I first saw that, I instantly thought of how, you asked what's the relationship between all these different hate groups and 9/11 Truth. My mind immediately went back to the SPLC and how, early on in the 9/11 Truth movement, the SPLC was essentially trying to say that 9/11 Truthers were a hate group and they were racist, and implying that all of them were anti-Semitic and I think I even first heard of the theory about like Israel being involved in 9/11 from the SPLC, and they were trying to make that sound like that was the entire 9/11 truth movement. So, I think even they went after people like Ryan Dawson, years ago. But that's what I first thought when I saw the Reddit thing. So, we've been hearing rumors, and I say rumors because the Daily Caller, neocon Tucker Carlson's awful website, was actually the source of this information. They claim that the SPLC actually sits on Facebook's fake news board also, even though that's not been reported anywhere else. So that's where my mind went when I first saw it. I was thinking, is this just more of this, these different organizations, these different groups sitting on these different companies, advisory boards, dictating to them what to do with things like 9/11 Truth, for example, which is strange because, and then the flip side of that is you go to YouTube, right? If you type in like 9/11 Truth on YouTube right now, it's like 99% like garbagey, more extreme type of conspiracy theories, lots of people jumping to conclusions about who did it, just this one group did it, no one else, kind of like crap. And it's really boosted on via YouTube's algorithm. I mean, it's pretty bizarre how YouTube's algorithm, even after they've purged Alex Jones and InfoWars from all these different services, still appears to deliberately boost things that contain hate speech or very wacky, things in the 9/11 Truth movement versus like really credible things. So it just really, I know this is something different than the YouTube thing, Pierce, but this Reddit thing I think is just an example of like what's more coming down the pike for us in the future in terms of, conspiracy media. And I haven't even, to be honest, I haven't even really been to that subreddit. So I couldn't even tell you to what level, like, the quality was of the research or information in it. Maybe you can shed some light on that for me.
I actually haven't been to that subreddit either. It is a private subreddit, so you would have to, you have to kind of contact the moderators of it anyway. Right, now, I have no idea. Now, maybe it was the weird thing is like if they wanted to use the same language saying there's shocking or highly offensive content, I could kind of understand that because, and this is not just Reddit, but you go to a lot of conspiracy forums or just the internet in general, and you're looking into 9/11 stuff. There is a lot of racist stuff out there, again about the Jews controlling everything. You mentioned Ryan Dawson before. I mean, he's certainly spread a lot of this crap. Richard Bolin, all of these like nut jobs. So I could kind of see why maybe them, using language like that. But the whole like misinformation is just very interesting. And I almost wondered if this whole quarantining was mainly about this subreddit, or at least the ideas that this subreddit was putting out there. So, and then they threw in a whole bunch of others as sort of like cover. Because another weird thing is like, oh no, go ahead.
I absolutely agree. No, I think that theory is dead on because, I mean, wasn't there even talk in France when what's his face, the guy, I think it was Terry Masson, released that Pentagate book, like one of the first 9/11 truth books. There were people in the French government saying that this should be included under the same hate speech laws as like Holocaust denial. Yes, that's, against the law in France. So, yeah, I 100% agree that this type of thing is cover for, banning something like 9/11 Truth, which is actually very powerful information. Let's say even if it is still to the brim with misinformation, there's still gems inside that are very powerful and frankly a threat to the stability of the United States because they're very true facts that completely poke these giant holes in this story where 3,000 Americans were murdered. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that, hate speech, it's dangerous and racism is dangerous and it's bad, but, I don't think this is what this is about. I really don't.
Well, no, and keep in mind too that there are quite a few subreddits that oddly weren't quarantined, including Incel Tears, which is so full of hate. about minorities, women. It promotes suicide. I mean, incel tears is horrible. The Donald has not been quarantined. Tons of like gore subreddits, and one that I'm not even going to repeat on the show, but it shows bestiality. So that's fine. That's not even going to get a like warning, from Reddit. And also the big conspiracy subreddit is still on there, which has tons of 9/11 stuff. So I'm almost tempted to try to sign up for this particular subreddit just to see what is on there that is so shocking, because I think there are other 9/11 subreddits that are totally fine, that anyone can access, that they don't have a quarantine. So it's odd, the way that they went about this, and again I think, like we were saying, link it in people's minds with like hate speech, white nationalism, and that's what's so funny is that all of the other subreddits, the sort of like alt-right and like right-wing, conspiracy things, like even like incel tears and some of like the white nationalism and stuff, they love conspiracy theories, but none of these groups ever talk about 9/11, right, Robbie? I mean, that's what I find, I tweeted recently, like Posobiec and Cernovich and that just turd, with Jason Chaffetz, who just wrote some, book about the deep state, this like, again, one of these like underdeveloped, childlike, like Neanderthal people. They use this term, but none of them talk about 9/11. I've never heard Cernovich ever utter a word about 9/11.
That's what's so fascinating, Pierce, is that we're in this era now where everyone seemingly who's into Trump understands what the deep state is, yet they never talk about things like 9/11 or any actual deep state activity, like even like real deep state activity. They never talk about any of it. None of these people even talk about things like CIA drug trafficking, in the 80s. So it's just very fascinating that you're right, that none of those people talk about 9/11. And it's also funny to me because part of my working theory about 9/11 is that white elites were involved, like in the attacks. So
right.
The idea that it's racist or hate speech to me is pretty laughable. I can understand that in the context of if your whole game with 9/11 is trying to boil everything down to, there's an Israeli hiding it under every bed type of point of view, because that's a really easy pickings for people like in the SPLC. It's a very quick leap to be like, well, that's racist, even if there is evidence actually that there was bizarre Israeli intelligence activity surrounding 9/11. So that makes sense to me. But yeah, like, for years and years, a lot of the 9/11 truth movement in general was like the Bush administration and Cheney like had something to do with this attack. Like that, those are like not even Jewish white guys. So I don't know why I'm going off on a tangent about that, but it's just angering to me to even think that people could have even remotely fallen for the idea that like 9/11 truth is a inherently racist or somehow, a form for hate speech. It's absurd.
No, I'm also fascinated by the trajectory right now with the 9/11 research community in light of this Reddit quarantining, where it really does seem like and I hate kind of admitting it, but like that the deep state, the government, whatever you want to say, they've kind of won in large degree because they've stifled any and all like real researcher. There's nobody credible. I mean, there are obviously. I'm using a blanket assertion here, but there aren't that many credible people out there still talking about this, or at least that are getting on podcasts or radio shows or God forbid TV. They're not really out there anymore, Now there's still some like nut jobs that show up at, all sorts of conspiracy conventions and stuff and hawk the same, holograms and nobody died and those sort of still seem alive, but even that is like kind of fading. And, you know, the people like you or John Gold or, you know, the people at History Commons, you know, I mean, I don't see Kevin Fenton being interviewed. You know, all those people have unfortunately just been so sidelined. And that's what I found so odd was like, you know, you've kind of won this battle, but yet they're still kind of like going after 9/11. Which should also show you the threat that the truth movement, the 9/11 truth movement did pose. You know, if you look historically back to, you know, the original truthers were, you know, people that questioned what happened at Roswell. And I've talked about this before, you know, you don't have to really be into UFOs or anything, but you should still, you know, respect where the original truth movement comes from. That had the CIA infiltrating them and doing all sorts of crazy stuff, but even the the ufology community is still alive and well. You know, it still exists. Yeah. There are still people writing new books, you know, writing interesting stuff. You know, it's still kind of coming out. Whereas the 9/11, I mean, it was just so, I don't know, like trampled on, which is partly why I'm so upset is like, as I've gotten more interested in understanding what really happened, you know, it seems like it's becoming more and more likely that it's just going to kind of disappear from the social consciousness. You know, it's not. I was actually chatting about this a few days ago with our friend John Gold, and I was mentioning, you know, it's the same thing when it comes to OKC. You know, Oklahoma City there's almost no doubt that there were multiple people involved in. You know, I mean, like the entire official narrative for OKC is bullshit, and most people kind of accept that. You know, most people don't, like, everybody knows there were at least two other people involved. You know, Terry.
Can I throw an addendum onto that really quick?
Sure.
Do you know the author John Ronson, who wrote Crazy Rulers of the World, sort of mock truthers, and you know, he followed around Alex Jones?
Sure.
He was interviewed on the Joe Rogan show about a year or two ago, and he was asked by Joe, is there any conspiracies that he, you know, was in the business of debunking, any extremists where he came across one where he actually believed the conspiracy and thinks there's something very odd about it? And he just said straight up, Oklahoma City, for him. I mean, for John Ronson, this like British conspiracy debunker guy, to be like, yeah, the Oklahoma City bombing is really bizarre. I mean, I've been trying to get a hold of him to like explain what he meant, because I'd like him to speak more on that. But no, I totally agree with you. Oklahoma City bombing, as far as I'm concerned, the golden trifecta, you know, it's this ridiculous term to use for it, but it's Oklahoma City, 9/11, and anthrax. Those were the three major false flag attacks that happened consecutively in this country. And I think that if we had an entire, you know, this crowdsourced energy that seems to be devoted to a ridiculous, you know, thing like Pizzagate, if we had that same amount of energy for those three attacks, you know, we might have actually gotten somewhere on them. You know, maybe found some more suspects, maybe confronted some more people, maybe got more evidence. I don't know. But I think part of what you were talking about earlier in terms of like, why are there ufologists still writing books, you know, and there's still a really active community. I think that at this point in time, Pierce, being a ufologist, there's not maybe like in the past you were mocked or made fun of for being into aliens or UFOs, but I genuinely believe that there is more of a built-in trained mindset now where 9/11 truth, if you're a truther, you're a goddamn idiot. Like, you're crazy. You're a lunatic. There's like weird emotional anger towards it. There's not that same anger and reaction to someone saying they're into UFOs. You might just think, oh, that person's like maybe a little bit kooky. Not like this angry, like, oh man, you're a lunatic. Like, the mindset responding to 9/11 truth is still extremely emotional. And I think it's frankly because, I mean, this is my own personal belief. I think it's because most of Americans who latch on to the official story of 9/11 are suffering on some level from a form of Stockholm syndrome. And there's somewhere deep inside of their soul where they know that something is wrong about it. So it's like that's where their anger comes from. They're living in a fascist police state from this false flag event. And I don't know where it is in their bones where they know it, but I feel like on some level that's where that anger comes from. It's like they don't even want to be confronted with the reality of it. So that's that extremely intense anger, comes from that well. But I mean, I think that, yeah, we're still living in this, in 2018, 17 years after the event, you'll get mocked in almost every mainstream journalistic circle for even remotely questioning the attacks. I mean, that's how crazy it still is.
Yeah, it is still kind of like a third rail in politics, or in the conversation, which is, I don't know, is fascinating too. Again, we were just talking about the OKC stuff. I mean, there's so much about that most people don't buy the official story. But even with 9/11, there's so much that just looking at the quote unquote intelligence failures. I mean, some of them are so in your face, and it's like there's so many that to the average person, they can't truly believe that this was all an accident. It's like, if this had happened, it's like the Benghazi stuff, I mean, that was sort of an intelligence failure, and that was a grand conspiracy with Hillary Clinton at the top. I mean, that's like one small cog in the, larger 9/11 story. So the whole thing is, I guess, I mean, we're probably, kicking a dead horse here. I think everyone is sort of aware of that. But yeah, like you said, for whatever reason, it is still kind of like not, touched on. And that, briefly, I just want to bring up one thing, and then this will kind of like link to something else I wanted to talk with you about. But again, talking about this sort of third rail and like the way that no one in the media, because even in the mainstream media years back, decades ago, there were still room for like conspiratorial, discussions. And I bring up I don't know if you saw this, Robbie, but like Brett Kavanaugh, our now illustrious soon-to-be Supreme Court judge, the anti-deep state crusader. He's he's this amazing guy. He covered up Vince Foster's murder. Remember that? The evil Clintons and Vince Foster and Whitewater. Brett Kavanaugh single-handedly helped cover up, Vince Foster's murder. Now that's nowhere. None of these, right-wingers, I don't see Roger Stone talking about this. Any of the anti-Clinton, puppets out there that just, go crazy over the Clintons. None of them are talking about Brett Kavanaugh's relationship to any of this. So again, even something like that where, the Vince Foster thing is definitely not something I'm knowledgeable enough to really speak on. But I do think there's something odd, something else happened. And again, if you think the Clintons are trafficking coke and all these other things, which I do believe, then, killing some guy is really nothing. And certainly the forensics of his gunshot wound don't make any sense. There's no fingerprints. There's a whole bunch of other shit. But, it's like, they won't even go there. Like, even these so-called, anti-deep state, crowdsourced Pizzagate fucking twits, they're still not going to talk about Vince Foster, because that might make Brett Kavanaugh look bad. Again, this elitist DC insider who helped, another elitist DC insider, the Clinton family.
Yeah.
But, the interesting thing though is you were mentioning before, imagine if this sort of like open source crowdsourcing, campaigns that could have happened with 9/11, if the amount that went into Pizzagate, if that had, gone into Oklahoma City or 9/11 or any of these things, and not to say that they didn't, but if they really kind of like stuck with it, maybe we'd have some answers. And yet at the same time, and you brought this to my attention, Robbie, we have Bellingcat. Okay, this is the ultimate in open source crowdsourcing, information. Apparently, Bellingcat is solving, some of these Russian Novichok poisonings. So, like that to me is just like kind of like should illustrate this whole thing. They're terrified of people, doing their own research, say on Reddit or some forum like that. But at the same time, they promote these sort of like pseudo open source, crowdsourced intelligence, organizations like Bellingcat, which of course just take a ton of money from Google and, all of these other, NATO and whatnot. But it's still like they're kind of presenting that image out there. And I think you're a little bit more knowledgeable about this story, Robbie, so I'll throw it to you. But I just find it so fascinating that, like, that's where we're at right now. Bellingcat is solving cases that apparently MI5 can't in the UK.
Well, it's so hilarious, Pierce. I mean, let's just cut to the chase, as the framing for this discussion, because, I mean, it's super obvious what they're trying to do here. I mean, look, the mainstream media has lost almost all credibility. Traditionally, the way that it's been since the Cold War, there's a great book by Nancy Bernhard called Cold War Television and Propaganda, that everybody listening should check out if you haven't checked it out already, that really lays out this extremely convincing case that, at first, a lot of Americans were willing to participate in peddling propaganda during the Cold War because they believed it was their patriotic duty to do so. They felt like they were soldiers fighting the Cold War. I'm talking about journalists from the time, early Cold War era. Then eventually the CIA and other intelligence agencies got sophisticated enough where that stopped working as well. After the 60s, a lot of protests. So what they needed to do was, create this idea of access and leaks and filtering their propaganda via like anonymous leaks to journalists. So that's the way it's been going for a long time. But as what you see happening is, now, even Donald Trump is talking about all these anonymous leakers and fake news, things like this. It's become a very mainstream belief that the mainstream media peddles in all these sort of anonymous leaks in order to peddle, propaganda from either intelligence agencies or governments or what have you. So now that we've reached that point where everybody is distrusting, of this, and they sort of know how the game is played, now it almost appears that Bellingcat's purpose is to be like, look, we're a crowdsourced intelligence gathering operation, and we're the ones now pushing, sort of these pro-Western, anti-Russian narratives, and we're beyond reproach. There is nothing we're doing that is suspicious in the least because we're showing you all of our work. We're showing you our notes. We're showing you our, our crowdsourced research. But what's hilarious to me about that is none of that really matters if the system is still the same. So, like, how do we know? I think this is pretty obvious that this was happening, but how do we know that Bellingcat isn't just laundering intelligence from the UK government through their BS crowdsourced intelligence gathering operation, just making it appear as if they gathered this through some kind of crowdsourced research? I mean, to me, that actually would be a smart thing for an intelligence agency to do to spread their propaganda, is to give it the appearance of a crowdsourced format, because then it doesn't have the same problems. It's not, it's not as suspicious looking. But I mean, I think that's absolutely what's happening. And this is just going to be the new format to just try to gain new, believers, essentially, because there's so many people who are disaffected and who are like, this is crap. We don't believe this stuff anymore. This is the new way to get people to believe it. And apparently it's worked so well. Bellingcat's gotten so much credibility that The Intercept, Piero Medier's Intercept, just hosted a Bellingcat workshop.
Right.
And, it's really bad, man. I mean, so when, and I don't know if you mentioned earlier, but Bellingcat's organization was the one who leaked, or not leaked, but reported on and broke the story of the second identity of the Skripal poisoning suspect. I mean, how crazy is that? That they broke, that no other intelligence agency had this information before, no other actual, like, shoe leather journalists, reporting had this information. It was Bellingcat who broke this story. So I think that marks a big turning point for what Bellingcat's going to become way bigger, and we already know that they're advising Facebook and stuff on their, like, fake news, council or whatever the hell it's called.
Oh yeah, and obviously, Elliot Higgins now is I would assume fairly wealthy or well off from Bellingcat, and the grants from Google and the Atlantic Council and all this other stuff has certainly paid dividends for him. And his whole, there's something about his whole story, what he's the unemployed stay-at-home dad who I'm just going to become an expert on, missiles in Syria and Ukraine and start this little website. I mean, I'm not saying that that's not how it happened, but certainly at some point, some powerful people had to have approached him and been like, listen, you want to, take this to the next level? And because the whole, I'm not sure exactly, because I've stopped following the Skripal saga, because it just became so kind of like convoluted, and there was, I will say there was sort of a bit of, this like, it had become so divided. Like the two camps were either Putin is ordering, all of these random people to be poisoned to strike fear in the heart of the West, and then on the other side it was, there's nothing at all. There's no Russian involvement. This is all a Western plot to, take down Putin. It had become so divided that it didn't seem like people were really presenting information anymore. But the odd thing with Bellingcat, and maybe you know this better, Robbie, but I mean, is this like, we're meant to believe that they've sort of like scoured the like databases that are publicly available of like GRU, operatives, and that's how they were able to match some like, blurry CCTV, still image? Like, how did they
apparently so, yeah. I mean, that's what they're claiming. And, just think about how strange it would be for a second if an open source, crowdsourced intelligence gathering group online broke the identities of like two undercover CIA agents. I mean, that would be like huge. Everybody would be like, how'd you guys do this? I mean, it would be, so it is very odd, that they did. And the thing with those two suspects is they were released by the UK government, pictures of them walking, I think it was in the train station, I believe, in Salisbury, walking around. They released those to the press and to different government agencies saying these are the two suspects that we believe poisoned the Skripals, and bring them in or whatever. And then I think it was maybe like a week later, RT International interviews them. They come into the studio for an interview, and even I think her name is, I want to say Margarita, the Russia Today head. Even she is not believing their story as she's interviewing them. It's very obvious. So it's a very interesting interview to watch, just because, we always hear that, all Russia Today does is push the Kremlin line, the lockstep Kremlin line. This is absolutely not the case in this interview. It's actually quite strange that their story seems to be falling apart. And she even asked them if they're gay, like during the interview, like why were they traveling together? Like going sightseeing, like what's like, it's a weird interview. So I recommend people watch that. But, I've seen some theories being proposed by people saying that Sergei Skripal was actually still a double agent. And that he was perhaps meeting with these two, it appears that they actually are, and this is, a thing that I will concede, is that they appear to actually be GRU or Russian military, of some kind. But, it's such a bizarre thing to, let's just think about just the idea that Russia would use a weapon that sounds like the only weapon I've ever heard of in my life that sounds like a Russian word, first of all. I mean, Novichok. I mean, that's just a little bit absurd in and of itself that they would choose this method of assassination. But, I don't know what's actually going on here, Pierce, but it does seem like, it's more, it's not just a complete hoax. It wasn't just like a stage thing completely, but there's something very odd still about what the UK government is trying to allege. Because, if Sergei Skripal is a double agent, and he was meeting with these two guys who are still working for Russian intelligence on some kind of intelligence gathering mission, then it's kind of in a way a perfect setup for, oh look, these guys assassinated, tried to assassinate him. So I don't really know what actually happened, but it's a mystery. But let's just hope they don't use it to like push for more military escalations or something like that. I mean, it seemed like that opportunity is kind of gone already to do that. But I don't know. Maybe we haven't seen the end of it. I mean, this identity was just released, I believe, on Monday. It was released yesterday. So, who knows where it's going to go.
I mean, and perhaps it is a bigger deal in the UK. I assume it kind of is, but I mean, to me, from my perspective here in America, the whole Skripal story seemed to have kind of faded away. It was the sort of hoopla about it. I mean, once Yulia Skripal gave that confession tape. Where there was some, MI5 agent on the other side of that camera with a gun, telling her to read lines. To me, it was over. I mean, the phone call she plays saying that she wanted to return to Russia, her sort of seemingly that she was unaware of what had actually happened when she was in the hospital. All that. But then it was more people are getting poisoned. And like you said, Robbie, too, I don't know where where you go with this from now. What it is the UK gonna declare war on Russia? Are we gonna start poisoning people over there? But as you were saying before, and this is something you and I were chatting about this the other day, the idea that maybe clearly, if Sergei Skripal was still actively working as a double agent, or even if some of the, if the other rumors are true that he was actively, giving information to some of the Baltic countries, or was still either way, a former high-ranking KGB agent who defects is probably under a fair degree of constant surveillance by MI5. So they were probably monitoring these Russian GRU guys, which, as you say, they do appear to be some kind of military intelligence or something. I mean, maybe they were just monitoring these guys, meeting with Skripal, and they've sort of concocted this crazy poisoning story, which obviously kind of got a little bit out of hand. They seem to have lost control of much of the narrative, although now maybe they're kind of getting it back with the aid of Bellingcat, which is obviously going to play ball. And now, pardon me, obviously now all eyes or all fingers pointing to Russia as, going around poisoning people. Again, let's keep it, where the hell is Skripal? Where's his daughter? Do they have nothing to say about any of this?
Well, what's interesting, Pierce, is that Sergei wrote a book, actually. The Guardian had an article about this, and the lead was buried in it, where he actually says in his book that he doesn't believe that he was poisoned by Russia.
Right.
So
no, I saw that too, and and again, that went straight in the memory hole.
Yeah.
It just I don't know if Elliot Higgins saw that either, but no, the entire story is so bizarre, and to kind of link it back, the strange sort of crowdsource, open source format of it is also intensely bizarre. And a lot of what Bellingcat does is done by other, like the Moon of Alabama blog. A lot of, the types of material that they put out is very similar, in a sense to what, because all Bellingcat really does is just kind of recycle, mainstream talking points and articles, and looks at Google Maps, I mean, anybody can do that. But, it's interesting the way it's sort of, we pick and choose which ones are important.
Totally. And I wanted to just throw this out there because it just kind of relates back to our 9/11 discussion. But one of the first times I ever saw Bellingcat's work was the Book, sort of missile, investigation that his website did. And yeah, I should clarify that he has a giant team of people now. Bellingcat is no longer just the one guy. It's, a giant team. They basically launched the Digital Forensics Lab for the Atlantic Council, which is essentially just the same team with more people that are part of that lab now, as Bellingcat's organization. But one of the interesting things, Pierce, to me about it was that it actually appeared to be using and I hate using this phrase because it comes from like the sort of Kekistani Trump era, but like meme magic from 9/11 truth to propel their own anti-Russian propaganda about MH17. By that I mean a very specific type of thing that I first saw in truther culture online having to do with the Pentagon crash. The Pentagon, plane hitting the Pentagon. All those diagrams that we saw endlessly for years where it's like, here's the light poles knocked down, here's these things circled with yellow and MS Paint, these are different angles, and here's, this is why the plane couldn't have gone in because the Citgo gas issue was right here, and here's like, 100 photos with the same little yellow lines superimposed over them showing you, pointing you towards things. Here's what to look at. Like, if you literally look at the first MH17 Elliot Higgins Bellingcat investigation in detail, it looks exactly like a 9/11 truther plane didn't hit the Pentagon slideshow. I swear to God, that is exactly what it looks like. And I would bet money that some people from intelligence agencies who had something to do with Bellingcat originally spurred that on, because on some level, I believe intelligence agencies were inspired by 9/11 conspiracies, or maybe they're even the ones who planted those plane didn't hit the Pentagon conspiracies in the first place. Because as we've seen in the truth movement over time, that whole theory falls apart. There's actually a mountain of evidence now that a plane did hit the Pentagon, but yet that left us distracted for years and years in the truth movement, thinking that a missile hit it or whatever hit it, But now it actually turns out that there's plenty of evidence that a plane did hit it. I mean, even though there's no video of it yet. But so I just kind of went off on a tangent there. But I just find that interesting that Bellingcat's original stuff reminded me a lot of like weird and frankly bad 9/11 truther stuff from that era.
Oh, entirely. And that was like just Elliot Higgins' whole, trajectory. Was very much like that. I mean, he literally was a man who sat at home all day in front of his computer. And like you said, I remember totally what you're talking about, where it looked like, he was on like, MS Paint, circling, this is the missile and here's where the plane went down. That's there's something so perverse about this whole kind of trajectory where we're at a point right now where we're like silencing people that are questioning the most significant, probably event in certainly in our lifetime, Robbie, but maybe in the past century, 9/11. I mean, the amount of how much the world has changed as a whole, and also the United States has changed. All comes from this one singular day in American history. And the fact that the people are being silenced or being sort of assuaged from looking into that, while at the same time you have these sort of like establishment truthers like Elliot Higgins, who is getting showered with money for basically, like you said, doing the exact same thing. He's just a shill for the government, or for the West or for whatever. I mean, I assume he must have a whole litany of reasons why he's doing this. But anyway, we are at the end of the show. I want to thank my good friend and guest, Robbie Martin, from MediaRoots.org, and also averyhappyagenda.com. And I'll be, maybe we'll try and see if Robbie can stick around a little bit for the second hour, but either way, I will be here, so please stay tuned.
Welcome to the world's meeting place. American.
Practically narcotics.
Freedom.
Oh, yes. I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Have you experienced the miracle of CBDs? They can help you reduce suffering, reduce stress, help you sleep better, modulate inflammation in the body, and is absolutely safe. Meta Hemp Solutions offers a radically innovative approach to CBDs for exceptional results. Stop suffering and reduce your stress now. Isn't it time for a good night's sleep? Stop worrying about tomorrow today. Lab tested for potency, purity, and is non-psychoactive. free shipping to all 50 states. Try our product risk-free, money-back guarantee. Use code AFR15 to get 15% off. That's Alpha Foxtrot Romeo 15 to get 15% off. Offer ends soon, so visit MetaHemp Solutions today at metahempsolutions.com or call 833-858-7500. Suffer no more. Get rid of the stress and sleep better. Get our product now at metahempsolutions.com. That's metahempsolutions.com.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
Are the trials of modern-day living getting to you? Feeling tired all the time with no energy? Is proper nutrition a challenge? Having trouble sleeping? All of these evils, sleeplessness, tiredness, poor nutrition, and stress, wreak havoc on our bodies and minds. Enerfood, our incredible organic superfood, has been here to save your life day by day for over 14 years. With the densest nutrition on the planet, Enerfood is filled with 20 superfoods and super herbs designed to cure the evils of modern life. Enerfood will turn you into a superhero, and your family and friends will notice. Don't you want that get-up-and-go feeling you need to seize the day? Why wait? Try it today and start feeling great again. Order now at www.enerfood.com and use the code TR15 for 15% off, or call 866-762-9238 to place your order by phone. Use code TR15 for 15% off Enerfood at www.enerfood.com.
Nicotine, alcohol, good drugs. Coincidentally, tax drugs. Ooh, how does this work? Thank God they're taxing alcohol, man. It means we got those good roads we can drive on. Because I'll tell you something, I'll be honest, man. If I were going to legalize a drug, it sure wouldn't have been alcohol. Sorry, there's better drugs and better drugs for you. That's a fact. Pot is a better drug than alcohol. Fact. Fact. Stop your internal dialogue. But Bill, alcohol's... Shut up! You're wrong. Get over it. I'll prove it to you, man. You're at a ball game or a concert and someone's really violent and aggressive and obnoxious. Are they drunk or are they smoking pot? They're drunk. I have never seen people on pot get in a fight because it is impossible. Hey, buddy. Hey, what? Hey. End of argument.
When weapons of mass destruction turned out not to be true, I expected the American people to rise up. They didn't. Then, when the Abu Ghraib torture thing surfaced, and it was revealed that our government participated in rendition, a practice where we kidnap people and turn them over to regimes who specialize in torture, I was sure then the American people would be heard from. We stood mute. Then came the news that we jailed thousands of so-called terrorist suspects, locked them up without the right to a trial or even the right to confront their accusers. Certainly, we would never stand for that. We did. And now it's been discovered the executive branch has been conducting massive illegal domestic surveillance on its own citizens, you and me. And I at least consoled myself that finally, the American people will have had enough. Evidently, we haven't. In fact, if the people of this country have spoken the messages, we're okay with it all.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, rocket copy. 4, 3,
your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. My apologies for some of the technical difficulties for the first part of the first hour. We were having Skype issues left and right, and literally Danny and I, we tested Skype just before we went live and everything was good. But of course, we had some issues there. But we are here now. We are up and running. My apologies also for being a little out of it today. I'm getting over a pretty nasty little cold, so bear with me if I sound a little off. But we're gonna get into some listener questions. And as I said before, I kind of put out the call there for listener questions, but I did get a lot, but I hope we get some more in the future. I had done I set up a hashtag, with just simple PPR questions, and I did get some real questions there, but I also got just like some silly ones from our good friend Brian Heiss. Which weren't of much help. But, I hope people will send me more questions. And, Robbie, are you on the line? I'm hearing a little rustling in the background.
Oh, I'm here, yeah. Sorry.
Oh, you are? Oh, are you joining us for the second hour?
Yeah, I'm going to join you for like 20 minutes. Is that cool?
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry. I thought you weren't joining us. Yeah.
No, I am.
Oh, well, that's great.
I'm here.
Yeah, no, man, this has just been like a theme for today. I've just been like up and down. You're sick too, right?
Me?
Yeah, are you sick or no? Did I make that up?
No, I don't have anthrax, no.
Oh, okay.
I didn't get it this year.
No, yeah, I've just been just all over the map today. Well, anyway, Robbie, now that you're with us, is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to in the first hour?
That's a good question. I was actually thinking about this before the break. Have you had a chance to see the Magnitsky Act behind the scenes documentary film?
No, I haven't, although someone sent me a link to it, and maybe it was on Twitter or an email. I haven't. Have you seen it? Yeah,
I think it's easily one of the best documentary films I've seen in like the last 4 years or so. It's so good because, and I don't want to botch the filmmaker's name, so I'm just not going to try to pronounce it, but the filmmaker behind it was actually a guy who befriended Alexander Litvinenko's wife. And he actually made a film years and years ago about Litvinenko, and with the narrative that Russia poisoned him and it was an assassination. So because of that film, it sort of put him on the map of being in the same social circles as people, that push these sort of anti-Russian narratives, U.S. politicians, people in the UK who push anti-Russian narratives. So he became sort of, beloved among that group of people. His movie was even promoted, I believe, by some neocon think tanks back in the day. Years and years later, he wanted to give a similar treatment, a documentary film about Magnitsky, because the Magnitsky Act that was pushed through the U.S. Senate and the Congress here was one of the first sort of like major salvos in sort of the Cold War 2.0 escalation in the United States. It was John McCain's bill. He pushed it through, I believe, in 2012. So this was like 2 years before Ukraine And this act also, there was a variation of the same act passed in like the European Parliament, the UK Parliament, like all these different governments in the world also passed similar acts sanctioning, these Russians, based around the alleged, assassination of Sergei Magnitsky. Now, the documentary is really interesting because what the filmmaker set out to do is he tried to basically recreate, with reenactments, hiring an actor to play Magnitsky, hiring actors to play the Russian prison guards, hiring actors to play the Russian police, and he filmed a full reenactment of like Magnitsky, dying in prison, essentially. And the official story of all of this happening comes from this guy who owns basically like a fire sale American banking company called Hermitage Capital that opened up shop in Russia during the Yeltsin era to like clean up all the, the free capital basically that happened there. And this guy, Bill Browder, who owns this company, Hermitage Capital, is the one who delivered the Magnitsky narrative to the rest of the world. And what he claims is that one day the Russian police came in and raided his business because the Russian government's so corrupt that they target American capitalists and just steal from them. And he claims the Russian government came in, did a raid on his bank, just out of the blue, for no reason, and then in the process stole the deeds to his company and then used the deeds, like the original documents, to re-register his company like with to some other random Russians. So basically he's claiming that the Russian police came in, stole his company out from under him by re-registering the deeds, and then while they re-registered the deeds, defrauded the Russian government of something like $300 million in taxes to basically frame Bill Browder and his company, Hermitage Capital. Bill Browder then claims that he sent his lawyer, he hired a lawyer named Sergei Magnitsky, he claims the best lawyer in town, to go tell the police that this happened, to go report on this corrupt police raid. And then when he does, he gets arrested by the same police who stole the company from Bill Browder and thrown in jail and is like let to die in jail from like he got sick and then they didn't treat him and he died. So that's what Bill Browder has lobbied all these world governments to believe and to repeat this narrative. And he's even developed like Bellingcat style slideshows and like PowerPoint presentations that all come from him, that he's handed all these parliament people, governments, senators as the evidence for his case. But what this documentary filmmaker found out in the process of trying to basically prop up Browder's narrative is that it completely falls apart under the most basic scrutiny. Sergei Magnitsky wasn't even a lawyer. He was an accountant who was already working for Bill Browder for like a year before this even happened. The Russian government actually accused Hermitage Capital of defrauding them of tax money before the raid even happened. So like the raid actually happened on his company because they were accused, the Russian government was accusing the company and Bill Browder of defrauding the Russian government of $300 million. So the whole thing is extremely bizarre because what it appears is that this guy, Bill Browder, is sort of kind of like a sociopathic, he kind of reminds me of like a Robert Kagan or a Bill Kristol in neocon. He's very well trained. He's very well spoken. It appears that someone from an intelligence agency or some shadowy group of people shepherded him through this process to basically like start like a Cold War 2.0 mindset across the globe. And that's the only explanation I can come up with because he himself and his company don't seem sophisticated enough to be able to pull this off. But I mean, and if I were to take a guess, this is not actually in the movie, but my opinion is that he got caught up in basically a money laundering scheme. He was trying to steal money. Someone intervened from an intelligence agency and said, look, we can get you out of jail. We can protect you from this, but you have to say this for us. And that's kind of what happened. And it's so fascinating because it really is one of the earliest big examples of sort of this Cold War 2.0 push. Came in the form of this Magnitsky Act. And it really was foundational for like the mindset that, 60% of these think tanks operate in now, but it's a very convoluted explanation of the movie, but the movie is extremely fascinating. And anybody who has any interest in following, the new Cold War propaganda, these dueling narratives, really needs to check it out, because you really see how the sausage is made in terms of how, like a propaganda narrative like this can be deployed. And what's ironic actually is that Bellingcat looked into Bill Browder and used their open source, crowdsourced intelligence gathering to examine his work. They would find out that it's all BS and none of it holds up to scrutiny. So I just find that interesting.
No, I definitely will check out the film. I might try to check it out this week or something like that. And because Bill Browder is such a fascinating character, and people might remember that during it was the Helsinki summit between Putin and Trump, that Putin actually called out Bill Browder during that press conference, and he said something like that Browder had funneled some enormous like $500,000 $400 million to Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, and then and suddenly people were sort of scrutinizing Bill Browder, but and Browder seems like you're right, Robbie. He gets his image as being some sort of like human rights defender, when he's really just this, investment fund CEO. He's a
criminal.
Worst.
He's a thief.
Yeah, exactly. And he moved to Russia in the 90s when everything was being privatized. It was a complete free for all. And I think probably which is more accurate to a lot of these like he was an oligarch. He just happened to be American born, but he probably didn't follow the rules that were laid out by Putin and others. To many of the other because there's what's his name, Prokhorov, right? He was the other some billionaire who tried to run against Putin. And he was jailed, and suddenly we're supposed to think that he's some kind of savior for liberal democracy in Russia. And it was the same thing. He was a rich, spoiled billionaire who, he did the one thing he wasn't supposed to do, and he got in trouble for it. And all the other guys kind of fall in line. But yeah, there's nothing heroic about Bill Browder going in and leeching off a country that is in a huge financial crisis. And then, yeah, I mean, I think you're so spot on there, though, Robbie, with this sort of new Cold War, because the Magnitsky Act is constantly bandied about. It's always thrown around.
Yeah, and another thing about Bill Browder is that he is so worried about this film coming out that he's tried to shut it down many, many times, and actually he got it. So Vimeo on demand, just like for me, like I put a very heavy agenda on Vimeo because I value it as a website that's unlike YouTube. They allow even things like nudity and stuff on Vimeo. So they're very more liberal minded. But they actually caved to a legal threat letter from Bill Browder and Hermitage Capital saying that this documentary is using footage of me without my permission, even though all the footage in the movie of him is like sit-down interviews.
Yeah, right.
With
news outlets and stuff.
Well, not just news outlets, but the filmmaker himself. This is the crazy part here. The filmmaker himself was friends with Bill Browder at the start of the making of the documentary. So all the interviews with Bill are like, hey, I want you to basically be the sort of the brain behind the script for this story. And he's having conversations with him in the movie, and it's only at a certain point in the movie when he starts asking him slightly challenging questions to try to clarify some facts that Bill Browder completely loses it. And even just the slightest questioning, Bill Browder turns to him and he says, I don't understand what you're trying to do here. You're going to have to be really careful if you're going to go out there and say that Magnitsky wasn't a human rights hero, because this kind of smells like a subtle FSB narrative that you're telling me now. He tells the filmmaker. But yeah, Bill Browder threatened Vimeo, said that it was illegal, and Vimeo caved and took the film down. And from what I understand, it's still not back up online. Unfortunately, it is up on some bootleg, websites, but I respect the filmmaker. I want him to make money off of his work. He obviously worked very hard on it, but it's such an important documentary film that I'm not going to tell people not to go, seek out those other outlets. But yeah, I mean, the only other movie I can think of is my own, tooting my own horn, that has like this kind of information in it about like the new Cold War and challenging those narratives. But this one is almost more powerful than my film because it really hones in on a specific single facet of the overall narrative and just destroys it. I mean, it obliterates it. So just for that reason alone, it's an amazing piece of work.
No, it's funny. I was just sort of Googling the name of the film, the Magnitsky Act, behind the scenes, and one of the first links that comes up is a Daily Beast article, how an anti-Putin filmmaker became a Kremlin stooge. So again, that's
oh my God,
rhetoric.
Wait, who wrote it? Who wrote it?
Katie Zavadisky.
That's amazing, man. Yeah, I mean, the Daily Beast, for people who don't know, the Daily Beast and BuzzFeed appeared to be kind of like intelligence apparatuses during the Obama administration for pushing out a lot of this Cold War II stuff, especially on Ukraine. It's very unusual. BuzzFeed was very honed in on Ukraine. Oh, actually Vice, too. Vice, BuzzFeed, and Daily Beast appeared to be the favored news outlets to leak this kind of government propaganda through, more so than like Washington Post and New York Times even during that era. I'll go to the grave. I'll fight it, arguing that. I mean, guarantee you the CIA was filtering propaganda through Vice. Absolutely 100%.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I 100% believe that, and their whole weird connection with RFERL and other, and Vice used to, I remember, some of the most glowing, I think pieces about Elliot Higgins. One of them, I believe, was done with Vice.
I was just going to say that I was looking into this guy named Oz Kaderji.
Oh yeah, I saw your.
He appears to be training. He's trying to replace Jamie Kirchick, essentially. He just screamed at Jeremy Corbyn in UK Parliament that he's an anti-Semite, but yet he claims he's a radical leftist Antifa protester. But get this, Pierce. He actually was embedded with the FSA in 2012 when the CIA was primarily funding them, and wrote like many, many pieces, like ride-along pieces where it's like, I'm with the FSA, smoking hash, check me out.
Right.
And one of them,
for Vice,
actually
right?
two of his articles for Vice in 2012 actually referred to Elliot Higgins as a munitions expert. This is before anybody even knew who Elliot Higgins was. Bellingcat was not even on the map yet. In 2012, Oz Kaderji for Vice magazine was literally referring to this armchair guy who lived by himself, who had he wasn't a munitions expert, as a munitions expert in the magazine. I just find that very fascinating because that's a blatant lie. It's not even like a stretch of the truth. So it's just odd, to say the least.
No, I saw that exchange, and I was looking at some of the articles that he had written, and I mean, aside from the ones where it's clearly he's embedded with some CIA assets driving around Aleppo, but other than that, there's also just like he's like the classic kind of like crude, just vulgar kind of Vice writer. And again, to the whole, right, like we're getting high, driving around with like AK-47s, as if that's cool to drive around with, terrorists and smoke hash and, and whatever. Find the one place in Syria where you can still buy Coke or something like that. It's fascinating stuff. And maybe we'll do like a whole show, just sort of looking at characters like that, because they're it's like every time one kind of disappears, Robbie, it's like another one takes their place.
Totally.
And it sort of reminds me a bit of like the a character I talked about many years ago on the show, Matthew Van Dyke. This probable CIA asset, so-called journalist who, this is the guy that went and fought with the Libyans against Gaddafi, and he got locked up, and and then he escaped from prison, and then he lied about being a journalist, and then he went and he fought with Al Qaeda in Syria, and he was also mixed up with Elliot Higgins early on, because Elliot Higgins is one of the many people that Matthew Van Dyke told that he was convinced that it was actually the rebels who had chlorine and other chemical weapons, and Elliot Higgins has always sort of denied this, even though there's a whole Facebook exchange between Elliot Higgins and Matthew Van Dyke, where Van Dyke is telling him, well, no, I'm positive that they have it, because I've been driving around with them. I know that they've stolen these sort of chemical things. But and Matthew Van Dyke then later went on to found some weird private, like a non-profit mercenary firm that trains Christian soldiers in Syria, and he's now kind of come out as this sort of like Christian nationalist, crusader. But it's funny that it seems like so many people, like this Oz guy you're talking about, kind of in that same vein, of this, like, it's so phony. Like, they think they're so fucking hip and edgy. It's like I know this is sort of petty, but you also brought up his like really crappy, I guess musical group that he was in.
Yeah. It was a teeny bopper, like alternative dubstep.
Yeah, sounds like the worst sort of like subgenre of all time. But that's the thing. They're all kind of like, that's what's so funny. Like, I kind of hate this term, but I'll use it anyway. They're all kind of like normsies, Like, that's really where they are. But they kind of put on this whole, like that's like that whole, all those so-called, like, left-wing anarchists that went to go fight with, like, CIA, funded rebels in, like, Kurdistan. It's like, you are the epitome of war. Yes, exactly. No, it's so strange. Like, they're all kind of like that. Yet they all have this, like, alternative veneer to them. But, like, they couldn't be more, and again, I'll use the term normsy, cause, they're fighting with the CIA. And they're in, shitty tween dubstep, DJ groups. Well, Robbie, I don't want to keep you, any longer. Is there anything else you want to add, or?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty much it, Pierce. Thanks again for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, my apologies for all the technical problems, mostly on my end, and me just not, being all together today. But, Robbie, please do, again, remind the listeners, where they can go to find out your, to listen to your, podcast. I'm going to try to get Abby on the show, sometime soon, hopefully with you. But again, loving all of the episodes on Media Roots. I'm loving that you guys are finally doing a weekly, show. It's just phenomenal. And also, update the listeners anything about A Very Heavy Agenda. I know you're working on the next installment, but is there any release date on the horizon?
As far as a specific release date for part 4 of A Very Heavy Agenda, not right now. I'm powering through it. I mean, we've got a lot of work still to do on it. But yeah, the podcast is probably the most active, stuff I'm actually putting out into the world right now. And you can check it out. It's called Media Roots Radio. And, we're going to put out a few, like, true crime podcasts in this, mini-series. We're shooting for early October, but it might come at the end of October. But we have a few sort of in the can of, in a very different format than what we usually do, which is me and Abby together, sort of doing a true crime podcast about a very specific crime. And I won't spoil it now, but, check that out at the end of October. And, and then I also make music under the name Fluorescent Gray, and I'm going to be putting out, a new EP in about a month now. So,
awesome.
Check that out as well.
Oh, I'm super excited for both of those projects. Robbie Martin, thank you so much, for joining us. So we'll definitely be talking again soon.
All right. Take care, Pierce.
All right, everyone. Once again, Robbie Martin, MediaRoots.org, and say again, Robbie? Oh, I think Robbie's gone. Well, that's like, that's just like the theme of today's show. We're I'm losing people. I don't know when. I don't know what I must have just either misheard what Danny said, or I just heard a completely different thing, because I truly had no idea Robbie was going to be joining us for another 20 minutes, half hour. But there we go, which is always good. Also, apologies if anyone out there is listening, live now or later, when this is a podcast. If you hear a weird vibrating noise, this like hum almost, that is my laptop vibrating, because the processor is about to just sort of completely crap out. So again, that's just if you're hearing that noise and you don't want to hear it again, then please make a donation on PayPal. Anything helps, $1, $5, towards my new computer. It would be, greatly appreciated. But, I guess we'll try and, power through the rest of this episode. I know there's been some hiccups and stuff like that, but, you're always allowed one. I mean, this is the thing with live radio. I know I've said this before, but, it's, like, this is like with any kind of like live performance. If you're doing like theater or improv or radio or anything like that, it's not always good. That's the thing. And that's something, I was talking with, someone recently, they were asking me about doing a radio show, and that, it's like, how do you do it? And it's like, well, you just have to, understand and accept that you're not going to have good show. No, this isn't to say that like Robbie wasn't good. He's always good. And I'm glad that he joined us here, but I'm not always great. But that's sort of the, that's a trade-off. That's what you get with, a 2-hour live show. So, I hope everyone is still listening and enjoying. But I guess we'll now finally get to, what I had intended to do, which was to answer some listener questions. Now, I have a bunch here. Some of these are I think in a typical, kind of Porkins fashion. Some of these are quite large, complex questions. So, I'll try to do my best to, answer them with as much detail as I can. I doubt that I'll be able to get through all of these questions, with just, roughly about 30 minutes of the show left. So if that is the case, I'll pick it up, next week for sure. I'll probably, be able to, cover at least a half an hour, maybe a full hour on next week's show. I mean, and if for some reason I don't, if we have a guest that goes long in the next show, I'll put them out as like a special podcast, but I'll try to answer some of them now. So here's one that was actually sent to me before I even asked, about, questions, and I felt kind of bad because I hadn't really, it was like an email, and I had kind of drafted an email that I was going to send. And this is from a longtime listener, Auntie. I hope I'm pronouncing that the right way. And I'll read the email in full as right before I just take a sip of water. Okay. Hi, Pierce. I'm a longtime listener of your podcast and would like to ask you for book suggestions. More specifically, can you tell me which books had the most impact on your worldview and understanding so far? It can be anything from fiction, geopolitics, psychology, etc. Many thanks for your work, Auntie. So, well, many thanks for the email, Auntie, and thank you for being a long-time listener of the show. And I think you've been around for a while. I know we've emailed previously. So this one was actually a little bit tougher than I had expected. And I was, cause there's like a lot of books that have kind of, I guess, influenced me or have been important to me. The same is true with like films and TV shows and, other medium. But, I was trying to think about things that really kind of, like Auntie says in the email, kind of impacted my worldview and my understanding. So some of these are books. Some of these are things that I read when I was in college, for instance, which is a very impressionable time for many people. And some of these are books that I read, later in life. I would say that this is incomplete list, and I'm going to go through some of the books, that I kind of picked, but I'll probably throw in a few more that are just books that I really do enjoy and I love and mean a lot to me. I don't know if they've necessarily like impacted my worldview, but I guess in some ways they have. But so I'll try to answer this as best I can. So the first one that kind of came to mind was a book that I read in college, and this was a book that was actually was like required reading for a class I took with probably the only professor that was actually like meaningful to my life and my understanding of the world. And she's someone that I have spoken about before on the show. This is Professor Shamim Bernie Abbas, who's a great professor. I think she still teaches at Purchase College. And she was probably one of the professors that really actually had a profound impact on the way I think about the world, and certainly was the main factor in why I kind of focused. I had a concentration on South Asia, and the Middle East as well. But I was really kind of very much engrossed in South Asia. Geopolitics when I was in college was because of Professor Abbas. And so one of the books that she recommended, this was in a class that I took with her, was Ahmed Rashid's Taliban, Militant Islam, Oil, and Fundamentalism in Central Asia. This is a book, I've spoken about this book before on this show, and I think I've even referenced it maybe all the way back on an episode of the Corbett Report that I was on. I think I don't know if James still. I haven't listened to the Corbett Report in a while, but I think it was like a film literature in the New World Order, and I think it was Charlie Wilson's War, and I actually referenced this book, even back then. So Ahmed Rashid's Taliban book is, I preface this. It is I guess a fairly kind of mainstream book, or it certainly got a lot of like mainstream praise. Ahmed Rashid he's a famous Pakistani journalist, who has certainly been like elevated as, by many kind of here in the West. But, Taliban, Militant Islam, Oil, and Fundamentalism in Central Asia is still a great book. There's a lot of really useful information in there. If you're interested about the Taliban, if you're interested about Pakistan's relationship with the Taliban, it's a great book for that. Ahmed Rashid was able to speak to a lot of these people. But the reason that I chose this book is not that it's going to be life-changing or that it's something that you should go out and buy because you're going to get, all this sort of new information. Not really that, but for me, this was a really impactful book, and it's something that did craft my kind of my worldview, my understanding, because it was one of the first, it was probably the first book that I ever read that was like I said, a mainstream book, but had information that to me was so kind of taboo and outside the realm of like acceptable, dialogue at the time, for me in college, that it really kind of like sparked my interest in understanding the complexities. And what I mean by this is that, Ahmed Rashid doesn't shy away from the CIA's involvement with Al-Qaeda, with the ISI, even with the Taliban, and there's whole passages in Ahmed Rashid's book where he openly talks about the fact that, the CIA, granted, they contracted out to, groups, and companies that were linked or even outright owned by bin Laden. His family, and in one case, I believe, is actually a construction company owned by bin Laden himself, at least on paper, that the CIA had contracted to in order to help, build tunnels. Now this was back this was probably in the late 80s, during the Mujahideen days. But, Ahmed Rashid never, he didn't shy away from this, and he was actually very sort of forthright in all of this, and even talked about connections between the CIA and some of these groups into the 1990s. And when I read this, and I remember being in Professor Abbas's class and reading this and I bring this up too because Professor Abbas was Shamim Bernie Abbas was a huge impact in my life because she was the first person, like the first sort of like professor or this sort of figure of authority. You can use that with air quotes because who really cares what a professor thinks? But when you're in college, it's so important, right? But Professor Abbas was the first sort of authoritative figure. And she's from Pakistan and had even, she had broken blasphemy laws and the Pakistani Taliban, threatened to kill her. She actually had to flee, Pakistan, for a short time, but then she returned and basically like didn't give a shit what they thought. When I brought this up to her, she was like, oh, well, of course. And she was someone that was not afraid to, talk about the relationship between the ISI, the CIA, and groups like Al-Qaeda, and even groups like the Taliban. And she was not, I would certainly not call her a 9/11 truther, but she was one of the first people that kind of planted a seed of doubt about much of the official story, particularly from the Pakistani side. That you had all of these, generals and ISI officials, that again is illustrated in Ahmed Rashid's book, that were working in Afghanistan, that had some form of relationship with Al-Qaeda, with the Taliban, and with other militant groups in that area. And Shamim Abbas certainly, encouraged us to look into that, to question this sort of relationship, particularly, and she had done a lot about, kind of militant Islam, and the sort of perversion of Islam by groups like the ISI and the Saudis as well. She had quite a lot to say about the Saudis, believe me. So, for me, the Ahmed Rashid's Taliban book was really kind of, that was a big deal to me. And it was, I will say it took several years after that, after sort of, cause I think that was probably my sophomore, junior year of college, so it wasn't until, a few years after I'd graduated that I really kind of dove into 9/11. But for me, that was like a book that kind of like put this all into context. Also, there's a lot about like, oil. Rashid's book also talks about Central Asia. So this was also kind of the beginning of my fascination with that whole region and, the Wahhabi influence. So yeah, anyway, Ahmed Rashid's Taliban, Militant Islam, Oil, and Fundamentalism in Central Asia. Very important book for me. I don't know I think most people that would read it now maybe wouldn't, it may not be quite as groundbreaking, but at the time it was, really important to me. So the next book is another book that I read in college. So again, I think it's an impressionable time. So, a lot of this stuff can be really important. This is a book, the book is called Hala. It's spelled, Xala, but in, Wolof, which is a language spoken in Senegal, it's pronounced Hala. This is by, Ousmane, Sembene. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. Who is a prolific, Senegalese, writer and director. And Hala is, probably, one of his, most well-known books, if not his most famous. And it's also, a fantastic film as well. And if anyone's interested in African cinema, Sembene is like a god in African cinema. Hala is a great film, wonderful soundtrack, very gritty style. But Hala it was another book that was sort of, changed my worldview. And so the premise is that it depicts, this, fairly wealthy businessman in, Senegal, in Dakar, called, El Hadji is his name. And he's like, I think he's marrying his third wife, at the time. This was, polygamy was legal at this time, I believe, in Senegal. And, so he's marrying his third wife, but he is suffering from crippling erectile dysfunction, which is actually what challah means. That is like a Wolof term for people that are like cursed with profound erectile dysfunction. And the book is they're using this whole metaphor of erectile dysfunction, that he can't get it up, and consummate his marriage, is a metaphor for a lot of post-colonial African governments that were still wholly dependent on their colonial, previous colonial overlord, or probably, current. In this case, Senegal, France. And if you watch the film version, it's been a while since I've seen it, but the film version kind of it fleshes out a lot more. There's a lot more in the film that's not necessarily in the book, although I encourage both. But for instance, in the film, there's there are these scenes where El Hadji and others are going to the Ministry of Finance in Dakar, and it's all very kind of corrupt and whatever. And there's lots of payola going on, but everywhere there's always this one white guy, this French guy, who's actually kind of pulling the strings. And and in the movie, it's very kind of, it's a little over the top, which is kind of the purpose of the movie. And it I think it was made in the 70s, so it has that kind of sort of 70s over the top feel, but it is great. And, and it'll like, with this sort of, cliche, he's got big dark glasses, he whispers in their ears. But, I don't want to give away too much because people should go check it out. I think the movie is still available like on YouTube, and if it is, I'll link up to it in the show notes for this. But it's a great movie, great book. It's a very short book, thin book. But if it meant a lot to me because it was this sort of funny, clever, complex way of telling a story about post-colonialism. I think, when you're in college, if you take political science classes, if you do a lot of geopolitical stuff, you read like The Colonizer and the Colonized by Albert Memmi, which is it's still a good book. You might watch like The Battle of Algiers, like Colonizer and the Colonized is it's a very academic book about colonialism and how it works. And it is important to read, and it's an interesting way of, it gives you a very academic portrait of how colonialism works, and the idea that the colonizer is inadequate but he is more adequate when he is subjugating other people, and that can be kind of boring. Whereas challah is this really fun, wonderful, interesting take on all of that, and it breaks down all of that. It breaks down the literal impotence of our main character, El Hadji, but also the impotence of, Senegal, that was still beholden to, France. And it's also one of those, it was a great book and a film. I also watched the film in college as well. It's great too because if you're unaware of the fact that France, controls the finances of West Africa, this was the first book that kind of illuminated that idea to me. And while this book was written, back in the 70s, that's still the case to this day. There is still that white French guy, that is embedded within the, central banks of Senegal, Burkina Faso, Togo, Benin, all of the former French colonies all have Frenchmen that are still, colonial overlords that are inserted there to control the money and ultimately to control the country. The CAR franc, which is the currency that a lot of West African countries use. That money is still printed in France. It's not even printed in Senegal. It's printed in France and then shipped into the country. So challah was eye-opening in that sense. And it was just a great book. I don't know. I highly recommend it. It definitely impacted my worldview, my understanding of the worldview of this sort of post-colonial, and certainly was one of the books that really kind of pushed me into the, anti-imperialist camp, as if you needed any pushing. But I would definitely recommend I definitely recommend the movie as well. Again, if you're interested in African cinema, it's like a must-see. It's a very important film. And it was something that it had a huge impact on me at a very impressionable time in my life in college. So those are the two books I kind of picked from college. So the other books I have are ones that I think probably people have heard me talk about a lot on the show. I mean, I hope Auntie's okay with that. I mean, they're probably the first two I don't think I've ever talked about, but certainly the next ones I have spoken about on the show. So the first one is Aberration in the Heartland of the Real: The Secret Lives of Timothy McVeigh. This is by Wendy S. Painting. I've definitely talked about this book before. It is something that, I read more recently. This was maybe a year or two ago when I first read the book. But it is, if you are interested in the Oklahoma City bombing, but more importantly, if you're interested in the, the white power movement, if you're interested in the history of it, if you're interested in how it began, if you're interested in where it's going, this is a book you need to read. If you are, interested in the Gulf War, the first Iraq War, that one that we've all forgotten about, and the brutality of that, and how, it affected not only the people there, but, the people returning from that. If you're interested in Gulf War syndrome, if you're interested in the psychological impact that war had on soldiers, you need to read this book. If you're interested in the concept of mind control, you should read this Wendy Painting really dives into the psychology of McVeigh and other things. So for me, Aberration in the Heartland of the Real kind of has it all, and it has completely shaped how I view all sorts of events. It has shaped how I view 9/11 in terms of the roles of the hijackers. The reason I'm so interested in the hijackers, and how they were able to do this is because of Wendy Painting's book and the questions that she raises about McVeigh, about what the government was doing to McVeigh, about the stresses of being, if McVeigh was an undercover agent, the psychological stresses that are imparted on people that are deep cover. A really great book. I can't recommend it enough. It's also just wonderfully written. You really feel like you're with McVeigh throughout his entire life. I love Wendy Painting's writing style as well. It's a wonderful way. She really writes, historical, kind of biographical stuff in this very fascinating, engrossing way. So definitely recommend Aberration in the Heartland of the Real. I know I'm running out of time, so I'll try to get the rest of these out. Silver Screen Saucers by Robbie Graham. I know I've mentioned this before. This is a book that completely, reshaped my worldview. It's a film studies book, dealing with the sort of film history of UFOs and aliens in popular culture, but also definitely looks at the history of the ufology movement. Excuse me. The role that government played, not only in crafting a lot of these narratives, but infiltrating these groups, and also the big thing about Silver Screen Saucers, why I would recommend this, why I would say this is one of the books that really kind of changed my worldview, is the concept of hyperreality that Robbie talks about in this book, is something that is applicable to the world that we live in at large. He doesn't, he's using UFOs and film as a way of talking about hyperreality, but hyperreality exists all around us. So Silver Screen Saucers, I can't recommend enough. If you're interested in, film, if you're interested in, the government tinkering with films, if you're interested in UFOs, if you're interested in the concept of hyperreality, if you want to understand how we are being affected by popular culture, how popular culture affects us, how we affect popular culture, how the government plays a role in this, Silver Screen Saucers is a book everyone should read. The other two I'll try to sum up as quickly as I can. Legacy of Deception, and I can't remember the subtitle to that, but everyone should know that, by Steven Singular. This is about the Mark Furman. This is about Mark Furman and his role in the OJ case. This was the first book I ever read by Steven Singular, and I've read many of his books. Obviously, him and Joyce are good friends of mine and of the show. Legacy of Deception changed the way I really understood criminal justice. It opened my mind to a case that to me really was didn't mean a lot to me. I thought I kind of knew it, and it changed how I viewed the way crimes are committed, how investigations are done, the role of the police, and also the role that racism can play in all of these things, and also how a conspiracy truly functions. That it doesn't have to be a conspiracy of hundreds of thousands of people all working together for nefarious ends. That it can be a conspiracy of misperceptions, which is sort of how Stephen describes the OJ case and how all this stuff happened. So Legacy of Deception, highly recommend. If you get it, get the Kindle version, because that's been updated by Stephen. The paperback is much older, but he's gone and updated it. And then also Revolve, Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood by good friend Aaron Franz. If you haven't read this book, go out and get a copy of it. I think Aaron still has copies. I hope so. I know that he was talking. Maybe you can get a digital copy of it. But if everyone hounds Aaron, he will definitely get some more. One of the most important books I've ever read in my life. Again, talking about transhumanism, talking about the occult, technology. It's so hard to kind of break down everything that's in Revolve, and it's not a spectacularly long book. It's a normal sized book, but there's so much there. And Revolve definitely has helped me to better understand all facets of the world that we live in. Be it the kind of occult side that's sort of everywhere, even though we may not be aware of it, but also the role that technology plays. A great book. Aaron is also a wonderful writer. So I highly recommend that. If, you can always check out, I think one of the very first interviews I ever did, it might have been the first interview I ever did with Aaron, was on, his book Revolve. So if you go all the way back in the archives, it might be around, episode, I don't know, it might be in the first 10 episodes or something that I did, with Aaron. But yeah, Revolve is definitely a super important book. Certainly to me. And that was one of the books that I read, during my serious kind of, quote unquote waking up, phase. So, that is something that is sort of, I view everything that happens in the world, particularly when we're talking about transhumanism or technology, I always view it through the lens of Revolve. So, very important book, for me. And also just a wonderful book. If you haven't read it, there's a lot in there. Really, really good. So those are the books, that I've sort of picked. There's a lot others, obviously. I'm sure there's ones I'm not thinking of, that have, shaped my worldview or whatnot. But those were ones that kind of popped into my mind. And this is something too, it might be fun to kind of, people ask me a lot, what's your favorite book or what are you reading? So maybe we'll kind of return to that. And maybe we can throw in, because there's really only one fictional book there. So maybe we could throw in, some more fiction. Off the top of my head, I'll say, another book that was, maybe not that changed my worldview, but, was certainly important to me, that is fiction, something I've talked about before, The Human Factor by Graham Greene. It's a really good book about espionage and about the human toll that espionage can have and the sort of, the sacrifices that we make, for, God and country. So those are my book recommendations, I suppose. Lots more questions that I will try to answer next week on the show. So if you want me to answer any of your questions, please email me or tweet me. I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank our guest, Robbie Martin. Once again, if you want to support me and the work I do, go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond. Well, thank you all for listening, and I'll be talking to you very soon.
No rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio.
Have you experienced the miracle of CBDs? They can help you reduce suffering, reduce stress, help you sleep better, modulate inflammation in the body, and is absolutely safe. Meta Hemp Solutions offers a radically innovative approach to CBDs for exceptional results. Stop suffering and reduce your stress now. Isn't it time for a good night's sleep? Stop worrying about tomorrow today. Lab tested for potency, purity, and is non-psychoactive. Free shipping to all 50 states. Try our product risk-free. Money-back guarantee. Use code AFR15 to get 15% off. That's Alpha Foxtrot Romeo 15 to get 15% off. Offer ends soon, so visit Meta Hemp Solutions today at metahempsolutions.com or call 833-858-7500. Suffer no more. Get rid of the stress and sleep better. Get our product now at metahempsolutions.com. That's metahempsolutions.com.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
Are the trials of modern-day living getting to you? Feeling tired all the time with no energy? Is proper nutrition a challenge? Having trouble sleeping? All of these evils, sleeplessness, tiredness, poor nutrition, and stress, wreak havoc on our bodies and minds. Enerfood, our incredible organic superfood, has been here to save your life day by day for over 14 years. With the densest nutrition on the planet, Enerfood is filled with 20 superfoods and super herbs designed to cure the evils of modern life. Enerfood will turn you into a superhero, and your family and friends will notice. Don't you want that get-up-and-go feeling you need to seize the day? Why wait? Try it today and start feeling great again. Order now at www.enerfood.com and use the code TR15 for 15% off, or call 866-762-9238 to place your order by phone. Use code TR15 for 15% off Enerfood at www.enerfood.com.
Tell the truth. Don't be bullshitting people. There's enough bullshit as it is. In fact, there's just enough. Did you know that? There's just enough bullshit to hold things together in this country. Bullshit is the glue that binds us as a nation. Where would we be without our safe, familiar American bullshit? Land of the free, home of the brave, the American dream. All men are equal, justice is blind, the press is free, your vote counts. Business is honest, the good guys win, the police are on your side, God is watching you, your standard of living will never decline, and everything is going to be just fine. The official national bullshit story. I call it the American Okie Doke.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio and service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs, and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control 0 out 1. Control is good. 5. Roger, copy. 3. 2. 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.